In the deepest corners of the galaxy, where starlight dies and hope becomes a forgotten concept, legends speak of a human who defied extinction itself. They called him many names across 1,000 worlds, but only one title made entire fleets turn away in terror. When the Krex Empire thought they had captured just another broken prisoner, they had no idea they were about to unleash something that would reshape the very foundation of galactic power. Some said he was dead. Others claimed he never existed at all. But when alien claws bind you in darkness and whisper a name that makes the universe tremble, you realize that humanity's greatest weapon was never technology or numbers. It was the one man who refused to stay buried. This is the story of how a single human became a force of nature, and how saying his name would either save you or doom you forever. The transport ship times Kethvar times cut through the void like a blade through silk, its hull gleaming under the cold light of distant stars. Inside its reinforced holding bay, Commander Marcus Chen hung suspended in energy shackles that bit into his wrists with each shallow breath. The metal restraints hummed with alien technology designed to suppress even the faintest hope of escape. Blood had long since dried on his torn uniform, and his left eye remained swollen shut from the interrogation sessions that had yielded nothing but silence. 3 standard cycles had passed since the Krex Empire had destroyed his ship, the Times, Defiance Asterisk, along with every soul aboard her. Marcus had watched through the viewport as the enemy's plasma cannons turned his crew into scattered atoms, their final screams echoing through the comm channels before cutting to static. He should have died with them. Part of him wished he had. The holding bay's atmosphere processor wheezed as it cycled stale air through the chamber. Marcus could taste copper and ozone on his tongue, mixed with the acrid smell of Krex pheromones that marked this ship as belonging to their warrior caste. His captors took pride in breaking prisoners slowly, savoring each crack in their resolve like fine wine. But Marcus had given them nothing. Not his name, not his rank, not even confirmation that he was human. Footsteps echoed through the corridor beyond the sealed door. Heavy, deliberate steps that spoke of authority and barely contained violence. Marcus lifted his head as much as the restraints allowed, focusing his good eye on the entrance. The door hissed open with a pneumatic sigh, releasing a wave of cooler air that carried the sharp scent of Krex battle stems. General Vex Thul entered like a living shadow, his elongated limbs moving with predatory grace. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, the Krex commander's exoskeleton gleamed with the dull sheen of chitin, hardened by countless battles. 4 arms ended in razor-sharp claws, while his triangular head housed compound eyes that reflected light like fractured emeralds. A crest of bone spikes ran from his skull down to his shoulders, each one carved with the kill marks of defeated enemies. Behind him followed 2 lesser Krex warriors, their carapaces bearing the scars of frontline service. They flanked the doorway with military precision, weapons ready but not quite aimed. Vex Thul preferred psychological pressure to brute force when extracting information. It was more artistic, he often claimed. Still breathing, I see, Vex Thul said, his voice a chittering rasp that the universal translator rendered into accented standard. Your species has such an amusing attachment to continued existence. Marcus said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was the only weapon his captors could not take from him. Every word was a potential crack they could exploit, every reaction a weakness to be pressed. So he remained still, watching the general with the patience of a predator waiting for the right moment. Vex Thul circled the suspension field, his 4 arms moving in complex gestures as he spoke. Do you know what I find most fascinating about humans? Your capacity for self-deception. You believe yourselves to be warriors, conquerors even. Yet here you hang, as helpless as a grub in a web. The general paused directly in front of Marcus, close enough that the human could smell the bitter tang of Krex breath. Your ship fought well, I will admit, but in the end, it burned like all the others. Your crew screamed my name as they died. Some even begged. A muscle in Marcus's jaw twitched, the only sign that the words had found their mark. Vex Thul's compound eyes glittered with satisfaction at the tiny reaction. Ah, there it is, the general purred. The famous human rage. But what good is anger when you are powerless to act upon it? He gestured to one of his subordinates, who stepped forward carrying a neural probe. The device resembled a metallic spider, its legs ending in hair-thin needles that could penetrate directly into a subject's nervous system. This little beauty will extract everything you know. Vex Thul continued. taking the probe in his primary arms. Your memories, your fears, your most precious secrets, but more importantly, it will tell me the locations of your remaining fleet bases. The war will end much sooner than your admirals expect. Marcus watched the probe approach with the same steady gaze he had maintained since his capture. The neural extractor would indeed tear through his mind like acid through flesh, but his knowledge would die with him. The combat drugs in his system would ensure that his heart stopped long before the device could dig deep enough to matter. He had accepted his death the moment the Time's defiance times fell. Everything since then was borrowed time. The probe's legs began to unfold as Vex Thol brought it closer to Marcus's temple. Any last words? Human? Perhaps a prayer to whatever primitive gods you worship? Just one question, Marcus said quietly, breaking his silence for the first time since his capture. Vex Thol paused, compound eyes focusing intently on his prisoner. Speak. Do you know who I am? The general's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. You are meat. You are nothing. You are whatever I choose to. My name, Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to fill the chamber, is Marcus Chen. The effect was immediate and devastating. Vex Thol's forearms went rigid, the neural probe clattering to the deck as his grip failed. The two guards took involuntary steps backward, their weapons rising as if they expected an attack from empty air. The general's compound eyes widened until they dominated his triangular face, reflecting not light but pure, crystalline terror. Impossible, Vex Thol whispered, the word barely audible through his suddenly constricted throat. You died. We confirmed it. The Battle of Kepler Station. The entire sector was sterilized. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since his capture, it reached his eyes. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. The chamber fell into absolute silence except for the wheeze of the atmosphere processor and the rapid clicking of Kreck's breathing patterns under extreme stress. One of the guards began backing toward the door, his weapon shaking in his claws. The other seemed frozen in place, caught between training and an instinctive terror that ran deeper than conscious thought. The Reaper. Vex Thol breathed, the title falling from his mandibles like a curse. You are the Reaper. Marcus's smile widened. That's what they call me. Yes. The general's carapace began to emit stress pheromones so intense that the chamber's filters immediately activated to clear the air. His forearms moved in rapid, jerky motions as he tried to process the impossible situation. According to every intelligence report, every confirmed kill record, Marcus Chen had died 3 years ago when the Kreck's fleet glass-melted Kepler Station from orbit. The entire system had been reduced to radioactive slag specifically to ensure that humanity's most feared operative could never threaten them again. Yet here he was, hanging in their custody like a gift wrapped in nightmares. How? Vex Thol demanded, his voice rising to a chittering shriek. How are you here? Simple, Marcus replied, his tone conversational despite his restraints. I don't stay dead very well. The energy shackles that had held him immobile for 3 days suddenly flickered and died. Marcus dropped to the deck in a crouch, rolling aside as the backup systems tried to reactivate, but the ship's computer core was already compromised. Had been compromised since the moment they brought him aboard. The Krecks had made a critical error in their intelligence gathering. They assumed Marcus Chen was just another Special Forces operative, dangerous but ultimately limited by human biology and technology. They had no concept of what he had become in the months following his supposed death. No understanding of the augmentations that had rebuilt him from the cellular level up. No knowledge of the quantum implants that let him interface with any computer system simply by being near it. They had captured a ghost, and now that ghost was free. Marcus rose slowly, his movements fluid despite the damage his body had sustained. The combat drugs in his system were already accelerating his healing, knitting broken ribs and reducing the swelling around his eye. His smile never wavered as he faced the 3 Krex warriors who had suddenly found themselves sharing a very small space with humanity's greatest weapon. Gentlemen, he said politely, I believe we need to have a conversation about the rules of war. Vex Thol lunged first, all 4 arms extended in a killing strike that could have shredded a normal human in milliseconds. Marcus stepped aside with impossible precision, letting the general's momentum carry him past before delivering a single punch to the base of his skull. The impact made a sound like breaking pottery, and Vex Thol collapsed in a heap of twitching limbs. The first guard managed to get his weapon halfway up before Marcus was on him. The human's hand closed around the alien's throat with crushing force, lifting the creature off the ground despite the significant size difference. The guard's claws raked desperately at Marcus's arm, drawing blood but finding no purchase on muscles enhanced with subdermal armor plating. The second guard fired 3 shots in rapid succession. Each plasma bolt passed through the space where Marcus had been standing a heartbeat earlier, leaving smoking craters in the bulkhead. The human moved like water given form, flowing around the energy beams while closing distance with terrifying speed. When he reached the shooter, Marcus simply placed one hand on the alien's weapon and squeezed. The plasma rifle crumpled like paper, its power cell rupturing in a shower of sparks. The guard had enough time to process what had happened before Marcus's other hand found his chest. The human's fingers punched through chitin and into the creature's primary heart, ending the fight with surgical precision. The chamber fell silent again, save for the labored breathing of the surviving guard still trapped in Marcus's grip. The alien's compound eyes rolled wildly as he struggled against an hold that felt more like industrial machinery than living flesh. "Listen carefully," Marcus said, his voice perfectly calm. "You're going to do exactly what I tell you. If you cooperate, you might live long enough to tell your superiors that their worst nightmare just came home." The guard managed a weak nod, his oxygen-starved brain accepting the reality of his situation. Marcus had not merely escaped from their custody. He had revealed himself to be something far beyond their previous intelligence estimates. The human they thought they had killed at Kepler Station was not just alive but transformed into something that made their greatest warriors look like children playing at war. Marcus released his grip slightly, allowing the guard to breathe while maintaining enough pressure to ensure obedience. "First, you're going to activate the ship's communication array and send a message to your fleet command. The message will contain exactly the words I give you, nothing more and nothing less." The guard's throat sacs fluttered as he tried to form words. What message? Marcus's smile took on a quality that made the surviving alien wish he had never been hatched. "You're going to tell them that the Reaper sends his regards, and that the war is about to change." Outside the holding bay's viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the small drama playing out aboard the Times Kethvar Asterisk. But deep in the ship's computer systems, quantum signals were already racing toward the nearest Krex communication relay. Messages that would reach Fleet Command in a matter of hours, carrying news that would shake the very foundations of the Empire. The Reaper had returned from the grave, and this time, he was not interested in dying quietly. The Times Kethvar's Times Bridge erupted in chaos as emergency alarms shrieked through the corridors. Captain Jekvol's 4 arms moved in rapid sequence across his command console, trying to understand how their prize prisoner had not only escaped but apparently taken control of critical ship systems. The neural probe reading from General Vexisthal's quarters had cut to static 7 minutes ago, and all attempts to contact the security team had failed. "Report," Jekvol commanded, his voice cutting through the cacophony of warning signals. "Sir, we're detecting massive system intrusions across all networks," his tactical officer replied, compound eyes focused on scrolling data streams that flickered too fast for most Krex to follow. "Someone has breached our quantum encryption protocols. It's like they're reading our systems at the quantum level." Jekvol's mandibles clicked in frustration. Quantum encryption was supposed to be unbreakable by any known technology, including human computers. The idea that a flesh and blood prisoner could somehow interface directly with their ship's core systems belonged in the realm of fantasy. "Impossible," the captain snarled. "Route all security feeds to my station. I want to see what's happening down there." The main viewer shifted to display the holding bay's interior, and Jekvol felt his primary heart skip a beat. General Vexisthol lay motionless against the far bulkhead, his limbs twisted at angles that suggested severe neural trauma. 2 of their best guards were dead, their bodies arranged with an almost artistic precision that spoke of someone who killed without emotion or effort. And standing in the center of the chamber, looking directly into the security camera, as if he had been waiting for this moment, was their prisoner. The human appeared calm, almost relaxed, despite the violence that had clearly just concluded. Blood stained his torn uniform, but he showed no signs of the injuries that should have incapacitated any normal being. His one good eye looked directly into the camera, with an intelligence that seemed to pierce straight through the electronic barrier and into Jekvol's soul. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Fleet Command. Admiral Thekmore himself is requesting immediate status report on our prisoner." Jeckvol's compound eyes widened. Fleet Admiral Thekmore never involved himself in routine prisoner transfers. If the highest-ranking Krex military commander was personally interested in their captive, it meant something far beyond a simple intelligence operation. "Put him through," Jeckvol ordered. The bridge's main display shifted to show Admiral Thekmore's imposing figure aboard his flagship Times Eternal Dominion **. The Admiral's exoskeleton bore the scars of 1,000 battles, while his bone crest had been carved with the symbols of conquered worlds. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of absolute command. "Captain Jeckvol, I need immediate confirmation of your prisoner's status. Has he been secured?" Jeckvol felt his throat sacs contract with anxiety. "Sir, we are experiencing some complications with the detention protocols. Define complications." The captain gestured toward the security feed, which still showed the human standing calmly in the holding bay. "The prisoner appears to have escaped his restraints and neutralized the guard detail. General Vexa Thule is down, possibly dead." Admiral Thekmore's compound eyes focused with laser intensity on the display. For several seconds, he said nothing, processing information with the calculating precision that had made him the Empire's greatest military mind. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the bridge crew instinctively step back from their stations. "Captain, what was the prisoner's response when interrogated? Did he provide any identification?" "He remained silent for 3 days, sir." General Vexthul was about to begin neural extraction when Jeckvol paused, realizing the full implications of what he was about to report. When the prisoner stated his name was Marcus Chen, the silence that followed was so complete that the bridge crew could hear their own chitin creaking. Admiral Thekmore's exoskeleton had gone completely rigid, his 4 arms frozen in position as if he had been carved from stone. The only movement came from his compound eyes, which reflected light in patterns that suggested intense emotional distress. "You will evacuate that ship immediately," the Admiral said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "All personnel to emergency pods. Do it now." "Sir?" Jeckvol couldn't process the order. "Admiral, I don't understand." "Evacuate the ship," Thekmore roared, his voice distorting through the communication system. "Every warrior aboard the Times Kethvar Times will abandon ship within the next 10 minutes, or they will die with it. This is not a request, Captain. This is the only chance I can give your crew to survive the next hour." The bridge erupted in confused chittering as the crew tried to understand why their supreme commander would order them to abandon a perfectly functional warship because of a single escaped prisoner. But Jeckvol had not risen to command rank by questioning orders from the Admiral. He activated the ship-wide evacuation protocol, his claws stabbing at the emergency controls with mechanical precision. "All hands, this is the captain. Code 7 evacuation. All personnel to emergency pods immediately. This is not a drill." Meanwhile, in the holding bay, several decks below, Marcus Chen listened to the evacuation alarms with satisfaction. The ship's quantum communication array had given him access to the Krex fleet's command frequencies, and he had heard every word of the conversation between Jeckvol and Admiral Thekmore. The Admiral's reaction confirmed what Marcus had suspected. His reputation had grown considerably during his 3-year absence from the galaxy. The guard he had kept alive was now cowering in the corner, watching with terrified fascination as Marcus interfaced directly with the ship's computer systems. The human's fingers moved through holographic displays that materialized from empty air, manipulating code at speeds that defied biological limitations. Ship schematics, crew manifests, and weapon specifications flowed past his awareness like water. "Please," the guard whispered, "I have offspring, young ones who depend on—" "Relax," Marcus said without looking away from his work. "You followed orders and cooperated. I keep my promises." He gestured toward the chamber's exit. "Emergency pod bay 3. You have about 8 minutes before I start making permanent modifications to this ship." The guard needed no further encouragement. He scrambled toward the door on all 6 limbs, moving with the desperate speed that only impending death could inspire. Marcus watched him go with a slight smile, then returned his attention to the Times Kethvar's time systems. The ship was a Times Drakthul * class heavy cruiser, designed for extended patrol operations in hostile space. Its armament included plasma cannon arrays, quantum torpedoes, and a particularly interesting piece of technology called a stellar compression beam, essentially a weapon that could trigger small-scale nuclear fusion in any target containing sufficient hydrogen. The power core was a contained antimatter reactor capable of sustaining maximum combat operations for several months. Marcus made his way through the ship's corridors with purposeful strides, encountering only fleeing Krek's crew members who scattered at his approach like insects before a flame. Word of his identity had spread through the ship faster than the evacuation order, and no warrior was willing to test themselves against the legendary Reaper. They pressed themselves against bulkheads as he passed, their compound eyes tracking his movement with the horrified fascination of prey watching an apex predator. The ship's armory was located 3 decks up from the holding bay, protected by quantum locks and kinetic barriers that would have stopped any normal infiltrator. Marcus placed his hand on the access panel and felt the ship's security protocols crumble beneath his neural interface. The barriers dissolved like smoke, allowing him entry to a chamber filled with enough weaponry to level a small city. He selected items with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years turning tools into instruments of calculated destruction. A Krek's assault rifle configured for human hands, ammunition packs that could punch through starship hull plating, a personal shield generator small enough to wear as a belt attachment, and most importantly, a quantum destabilization device originally designed for breaching fortified positions. The evacuation alarms continued to wail as Marcus made his way toward the ship's bridge. According to the internal sensors, most of the crew had successfully reached the escape pods, which were already launching toward the safety of nearby vessels. Captain Jekvol and his senior staff would be among the last to abandon ship, following Krek's naval tradition that demanded officers remain at their posts until all subordinates were clear. Marcus found them on the bridge, working frantically to erase sensitive data from the ship's computers before evacuation. 4 Krek's officers clustered around the central command station, their claws flying across control surfaces as they attempted to scrub intelligence databases and communication logs. They looked up as the bridge doors opened, and their coordination immediately fell apart. Captain Jekvol straightened to his full height, his 4 arms spreading in what humans would have recognized as a gesture of defiant challenge. "I will not abandon my ship to a terrorist." Marcus stepped onto the bridge with casual confidence, his captured weapons visible but not immediately threatening. "I'm not a terrorist, Captain. I'm a force of nature." "You are a murderer and a war criminal," Jekvol snarled. "The entire galaxy knows what you did at Kepler Station." "Kepler Station?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, his expression curious rather than defensive. "You mean when I killed 14,000 Krek soldiers who were in the process of massacring civilian colonies? When I used their own weapons to turn their fleet into radioactive debris? That Kepler Station? You violated the laws of war. You used forbidden weapons against military targets." Marcus laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "The laws of war? Your empire has been systematically exterminating human settlements for 5 years. You've glassed entire worlds because they refused to surrender. You've turned captured civilians into experimental subjects for your weapons programs. And you want to lecture me about the laws of war?" He took another step forward, and the bridge crew instinctively backed away. "Let me explain something to you, Captain. I don't follow the laws of war. I follow the law of consequences. Your empire chose to fight this war without limits, so I became unlimited." The quantum destabilization device in Marcus's hand began to emit a low harmonic whine as he activated its charging sequence. The sound was barely audible, but it seemed to fill the bridge with a presence that made the Krek's crew's exoskeletons ache in resonance. "I'm going to give you the same choice I gave your guard," Marcus continued conversationally. "You can cooperate and live, or you can resist and die. But either way, this ship becomes my property in about 60 seconds. Captain Jekvol's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed his options. The human standing before him was not just a skilled operative or enhanced soldier. He was something that had transcended normal biological limitations, something that existed at the intersection of technology and focused will. Fighting him would be like challenging a natural disaster to personal combat. "What do you want?" Jekvol asked finally. Marcus smiled, and for the first time, it contained genuine warmth. "I want you to deliver a message to Admiral Thekmore. Tell him that the Reaper has returned from the dead. And this time I'm not playing defense. The captain's compound eyes focused on the device in Marcus's hand, watching its charging indicators climb toward critical levels. "And if I refuse, then you get to explain to whatever gods the Krex worship why you chose pride over the lives of your crew," Marcus replied. "Your choice, Captain, but make it quickly. This ship launches its new mission in 30 seconds, with or without your cooperation." Outside the bridge's main viewport, the last emergency pods were disappearing into the star field, carrying the Times Kethvar's Times crew toward the uncertain safety of the Krex fleet. Soon the ship would be empty except for Marcus Chen and whatever destiny he chose to write with its weapons and engines. The Reaper had returned to the galaxy, and his war was about to begin. In earnest, Admiral Thekmore paced the bridge of the Times Eternal Dominion Times like a caged predator, his forearms moving in agitated patterns that reflected deep psychological stress. Around him, the flagship's crew maintained their positions with the rigid discipline of warriors who knew their commander's moods could determine their survival. The evacuation of the Times Kethvar Times had been completed 12 minutes ago, but the captured vessel remained ominously active on their sensor displays. "Status report," Thekmore commanded, his voice carrying the sharp edge of barely controlled anxiety. "Sir, the Times Kethvar Times is still under power," his tactical officer replied, compound eyes focused on the scrolling data streams. "All crew pods have been recovered by the escort vessels, but the ship itself shows signs of continued operation. Someone is definitely aboard and in control of her systems." Thekmore's mandibles clicked in rapid sequence, a nervous habit that had developed during the years since Kepler Station. 3 years of believing that Marcus Chen was dead, that the galaxy's most dangerous human had been reduced to radioactive atoms, along with the space station where he had made his final stand. 3 years of gradually reduced security protocols and increasingly confident military operations. All of that confidence had just evaporated like morning frost under a fusion torch. "Communications," the Admiral ordered. "Patch me through to Earth Command. Priority Alpha authorization." The bridge's main display flickered to reveal the familiar blue-green curve of Earth hanging against the starfield. The communication lag to the human homeworld was nearly instantaneous thanks to quantum entanglement relays. But the political implications of this contact would reverberate for months. Direct communication between opposing fleet commanders was rare during active hostilities, reserved for matters of supreme importance. Admiral Sarah Chen appeared on the screen within minutes, her gray hair pulled back in the severe bun that had become her signature style. She wore the dress uniform of the Terran Defense Force, its blue fabric decorated with more campaign ribbons than most officers could earn in several lifetimes. Her eyes held the calculating intelligence that had made her humanity's most effective military strategist. "Admiral Thekmore," she said with formal courtesy, "this is an unexpected communication. I trust you have good reason for initiating contact during active hostilities." Thekmore studied her face with the intensity of someone searching for hidden information. Admiral Chen had been Marcus's commanding officer before his supposed death, and their relationship had been the subject of considerable Krex intelligence speculation. Some reports suggested they were related by blood kinship. Others claimed a mentor-student dynamic that transcended normal military hierarchies. "Admiral Chen, I need immediate confirmation of the status of one of your operatives. I'm not in the habit of discussing classified personnel with enemy commanders," she replied smoothly. "Perhaps you could be more specific about the nature of your inquiry." "Marcus Chen," Thekmore said simply. The effect on Admiral Chen was subtle but unmistakable. A slight tightening around her eyes, a pause of exactly 2 heartbeats before responding, the kind of micro-expressions that suggested carefully controlled emotional responses. "Marcus Chen died 3 years ago at Kepler Station," she said finally. "His remains were confirmed destroyed when your fleet glassed the system. Surely your own intelligence services have verified this information." "Our intelligence services confirmed the destruction of Kepler Station and all personnel aboard," Thekmore agreed. "But intelligence services can be wrong, especially when dealing with someone who specializes in achieving the impossible." Admiral Chen's expression remained carefully neutral, but her silence spoke volumes. In the background of her command center, Thekmore could see other human officers moving with the urgent efficiency that suggested a major operational development. The timing was far too convenient to be coincidental. "Admiral," Thekmore continued, "one of my ships recently captured a human prisoner during a patrol operation. This prisoner has now escaped custody and identified himself as Marcus Chen. He has demonstrated capabilities that far exceed normal human parameters. Capabilities such as direct neural interface with quantum-encrypted computer systems, physical enhancements that allow him to overpower multiple Krex warriors simultaneously, and most concerning, access to detailed intelligence about our fleet movements and command structures. Admiral Chen's poker face slipped for just a moment, revealing something that might have been satisfaction mixed with concern. If Marcus Chen were alive, which I am not confirming, what would you propose to do about it? The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. Both admirals understood the implications perfectly. Marcus Chen alive meant that every assumption about the war's strategic balance was now invalid. It meant that the Krex Empire's carefully planned expansion could be derailed by a single individual with the right motivation and resources. I propose a temporary ceasefire, Thekmor said carefully. 24 hours. No offensive operations by either side while we attempt to contain this situation. Contain? Admiral Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. That's an interesting choice of words. What exactly do you think needs to be contained? Before Thekmor could answer, his tactical officer interrupted with urgent chittering. Sir, the Times Kethvar Times is moving. She's broken orbit and set course for the inner system. The Admiral's forearms moved rapidly across his command station, calling up tactical displays and sensor readings. The captured ship was indeed accelerating toward the star system's inhabited worlds, her course taking her directly through the patrol routes of 3 Krex battle groups. At current velocity, she would reach the first defensive perimeter in approximately 4 hours. Admiral Chen, Thekmor said, his voice carrying new urgency. One of your operatives has just stolen a Times Drakthul Asterisk class heavy cruiser and is heading toward civilian targets. If this is part of some Terran military operation, Admiral, Sarah Chen interrupted, and for the first time, her expression showed genuine concern. If Marcus Chen is alive and operating independently, then he is no longer under TDF command structure. He was declared dead 3 years ago. Whatever he's doing now, he's doing it on his own authority. The implications struck Thekmor like physical blows. Marcus Chen operating under military command was dangerous enough, constrained by rules of engagement and strategic objectives. Marcus Chen operating as a free agent, motivated by personal vendetta and unlimited by conventional military thinking, was something else entirely. You have to call him off, Thekmor said, abandoning all pretense of diplomatic language. Whatever your people did to him, whatever enhancements or modifications they made, he's become something beyond rational control. I told you, Admiral. Marcus Chen is dead. Then explain to me how a dead man just took control of one of our most advanced warships. Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on something beyond the communication pickup. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone revealing classified information against their better judgment. 3 years ago, Marcus Chen volunteered for an experimental program, Project Lazarus. The goal was to create enhanced operatives capable of operating independently behind enemy lines for extended periods. The process involved neural augmentation, genetic modification, and quantum mechanical implants that would allow direct interface with any computer system. Volunteers? Thekmor's compound eyes widened. You created super soldiers? We created one super soldier, Sarah Chen corrected. The process was so traumatic that most subjects died during the enhancement procedures. Marcus was the only one who survived the full protocol. And even then, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Even then, we weren't sure what we had created. The psychological profiles after his transformation showed significant deviation from baseline human norms. What kind of deviation? The kind that made our psychologists recommend immediate termination of the project. Marcus had become something that could think and react faster than any human in history, but he had also become something that could make decisions without the emotional constraints that normally limit human behavior. He could calculate the acceptable cost of any action in terms of pure strategic benefit. Thekmor felt his exoskeleton begin to emit stress pheromones as the full scope of the situation became clear. You created a perfect killing machine, and then lost control of it. We didn't lose control, Admiral Chen said firmly. Marcus chose to sacrifice himself at Kepler Station to prevent a massive Krex offensive. He stayed behind to ensure the station's destruction and the death of your invasion fleet. We assumed he died with the station. But he didn't die. Apparently not. The tactical display updated to show the Kethvar times continuing its approach toward the inner system. Long-range sensors detected weapons charging and defensive systems activating. Whatever Marcus Chen planned to do with the stolen cruiser, he was preparing for significant resistance. "Admiral," Thickmore said, "I am officially requesting Terran assistance in stopping your rogue operative. If he reaches the civilian colonies in the inner system—" "He won't target civilians," Admiral Chen interrupted. "Whatever Marcus has become, he still follows certain principles, but military targets." She trailed off, leaving the implication hanging between them. Aboard the Kethvar, Marcus Chen stood alone on the bridge, surrounded by holographic displays that showed the disposition of Krek's forces throughout the star system. The ship's AI had been completely subverted by his neural implants, turning the vessel's own sensors and communication arrays into windows into enemy operations. He could see every patrol route, every defensive position, every weak point in their carefully constructed perimeter. The star system designated Krex Delta 7 was home to approximately 40 million Krex civilians, spread across 3 habitable worlds. It also served as a major fleet staging area, with 2 orbital shipyards and a military research facility that specialized in developing new weapons for the Empire's expansion efforts. The research facility held particular interest for Marcus, as intelligence reports suggested they were working on biological weapons, specifically designed to target human physiology. He had spent the past hour studying the enemy's defensive arrangements with the calculating precision that had made him legendary among human special forces. The Krex had positioned their battle groups in a layered defense pattern, with lighter patrol ships forming an outer perimeter and heavy cruisers protecting the critical infrastructure. It was a textbook defensive deployment, effective against conventional assault forces. But Marcus Chen had never been conventional. The Kethvar's weapon systems responded to his mental commands like extensions of his own body. Plasma cannons swiveled to optimal firing positions while quantum torpedoes armed themselves with deadly purpose. The stellar compression beam, the ship's most devastating weapon, began its charging sequence, drawing power from the antimatter core in carefully measured increments. "Computer," Marcus said aloud, his voice echoing in the empty bridge. "Display tactical analysis of enemy fleet composition." The holographic display shifted to show detailed schematics of each Krex vessel within sensor range. The ship's AI had cross-referenced hull configurations with known performance specifications, creating a comprehensive picture of enemy capabilities. 4 heavy cruisers, 8 destroyers, and 23 patrol vessels stood between Marcus and his primary target. Under normal circumstances, a single ship attacking such a force would be suicidal. But the Kethvar was no longer operating under normal circumstances. Marcus's modifications to her systems had improved targeting accuracy by 30% and increased power output across all weapon arrays. More importantly, the ship now carried a passenger who could predict enemy movements with uncanny precision. The first Krex patrol encountered the stolen cruiser at the outer edge of the system's defense perimeter. 3 light destroyers had been conducting routine sweeps when their sensors detected an approaching vessel broadcasting Krex identification codes. Standard protocol required them to challenge any unscheduled traffic, but the Kethvar's responses seemed authentic enough to warrant cautious approach rather than immediate attack. That caution proved fatal. Marcus allowed the patrol to close within optimal weapons range before revealing his true intentions. The stellar compression beam fired once, its exotic energy striking the lead destroyer's hull with the force of a miniature star. The Krex vessel simply ceased to exist. Its atomic structure destabilized so rapidly that its destruction appeared more like evaporation than explosion. The 2 surviving destroyers had exactly enough time to transmit a warning before plasma cannon fire reduced them to expanding clouds of superheated debris. Marcus's targeting had been surgical in its precision, disabling their communication arrays before delivering killing blows to their power cores. The entire engagement lasted less than 40 seconds. Warning signals raced through the Krex fleet as patrol commands realized they were under attack by an unknown enemy using familiar ship configurations. The defensive perimeter began collapsing inward, with battle groups converging on the projected course of the hostile vessel. But Marcus had already changed course, using the system's asteroid fields to mask his approach toward a different vector. The next engagement came 18 minutes later, when Marcus encountered a heavy cruiser escorting a supply convoy. The enemy ship was a Veltharan-class vessel, larger and more heavily armed than the Kethvar, but her captain had been caught completely unprepared for combat against someone who could predict his tactical responses with mathematical precision. Marcus struck without warning, targeting the cruiser's engine section with quantum torpedoes that penetrated her shields through microscopic quantum tunnels. The explosions crippled her maneuvering capability while leaving her weapon systems intact exactly as Marcus had intended. A disabled enemy was more valuable than a dead one. At least for the moment. "This is Captain Vorthek of the Endless Fury," came the communication from the crippled cruiser. "Identify yourself immediately, or face annihilation." Marcus activated the communication array, his image appearing on screens throughout the Krex vessel. The effect was immediate and dramatic, as every Krex warrior who saw his face understood exactly who they were fighting. "This is Marcus Chen," he said simply. "You know who I am. You know what I'm capable of. I'm giving your crew 60 seconds to abandon ship before I finish what I started." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of damage control alarms aboard the Endless Fury. Captain Vorthek's compound eyes reflected the internal struggle between military duty and survival instinct. Everyone in the Krex fleet knew the stories about the Reaper, tales that had grown into legends during his 3-year absence. They knew that he never made empty threats. "You are a war criminal," Vorthek said finally, his voice carrying the weight of someone making a last desperate stand. "The Empire will never surrender to terrorism." "I'm not asking for surrender," Marcus replied. "I'm offering you a choice. Evacuate your ship and live, or stay aboard and die. But understand this: in 55 seconds, your vessel becomes part of my weapon." The communication ended, leaving Vorthek to contemplate an impossible decision. Fighting Marcus Chen was essentially suicide, but abandoning a perfectly functional warship violated every principle of Krex military tradition. The captain looked around his bridge at officers whose loyalty had never been questioned. Warriors who would follow him into any battle. "All hands," he said finally. "Abandon ship. Emergency evacuation. All personnel to escape pods immediately." The order went out across the fleet channels, carrying implications that reached far beyond a single vessel. The crew of the Endless Fury was evacuating not because of system failure or catastrophic damage, but because their captain acknowledged that fighting Marcus Chen was beyond their capabilities. The message was clear to every Krex warrior monitoring the communications the Reaper had returned, and he was winning. Marcus watched the evacuation with professional satisfaction, counting escape pods as they launched toward nearby friendly vessels. When the last pod cleared the cruiser's launch bay, he initiated a remote takeover of the abandoned ship systems. The Endless Fury would serve his purposes much better as an unmanned weapons platform than as radioactive debris. 2 ships now answered to his commands, their combined firepower representing a significant threat to any defensive position in the star system. But Marcus's true target still lay deeper in the system, protected by defensive stations and the concentrated might of the Krex fleet. The research facility where they developed weapons to kill humans would require more than conventional assault tactics. It would require the kind of strategy that only a dead man could devise and execute. Admiral Thekmore watched the tactical displays with growing horror as reports flooded in from across the system. 3 destroyed patrol vessels, 1 heavy cruiser abandoned to enemy control, and Marcus Chen driving deeper into Krex space with methodical precision that suggested he had planned this operation for years. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender requests from 6 different patrol groups. They're requesting permission to withdraw from projected intercept courses." Thekmore's mandibles clicked in bitter understanding. Marcus Chen's reputation was doing half his work for him, turning professional warriors into frightened insects who saw death in every shadow. The psychological impact of his return was proving almost as devastating as his actual combat capabilities. "Denied," the Admiral said firmly. "All units will maintain defensive positions and engage the hostile vessels with maximum force." But even as he gave the order, Thekmore knew that conventional tactics would not stop what Marcus Chen had become. The human had transcended normal limitations, becoming something that existed at the intersection of technology and focused will. He was no longer just a soldier, or even a weapon. He had become a force of nature, given human form and purpose. The war was about to change in ways that no one could have predicted. And Admiral Thekmore was beginning to understand that the Krex Empire's greatest victory 3 years ago had simply delayed their ultimate reckoning with humanity's most dangerous creation.